Alison, we will move now to you, Arizza. You are the founder of Kris Library, a non-profit organization that uses education as a pathway to peace in the Philippines through building libraries and promoting the inclusion of peace education in schools for young people affected by conflict and terrorism. Can you please tell us more about the role of education as a pathway to peace and how this forms part of your work?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. My name is Arizza. I'm from the Philippines, and today I'll be talking about education as a pathway to peace. Next slide, please. I want to start with a story. My uncle was a talented, ambitious student leader whose greatest dream was to become a lawyer. Unfortunately, as a young man, he joined an Islamist extremist group in the 90s based in southern Philippines and hid this as a secret from his family. The details were never clear, but he disappeared to dedicate his life to this extremist group. He reappeared many years later, but as a completely different person, disillusioned, hurt, and perpetually struggling to start a new life. He passed away last year with no job, no family of his own, and no possessions to his name. My uncle, my family, come from Sulu, an island province in the Philippines that in past decades has become a hotbed for terrorist attacks and activities by violent extremist groups. His story is not unique. There are many others like him in the Philippines whose lives have been altered forever by violent extremism. We don't know exactly how many thousand fighters there are in these groups. What we know for sure is that most of these members are young people. Why do they fight? The drivers of violent extremism are as diverse as the stories of those involved. And one of the solutions that remain uniquely positioned to address a variety of these drivers all at the same time is education. And one such solution in this field is Extremely Together. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, sorry about that. Okay. One such solution in this field is Extremely Together, a project by the Kofi Annan Foundation that has brought together 10 young leaders from all over the world, including myself, to prevent violent extremism and promote peace. According to its manifesto, rather than telling young people what they should do, Extremely Together works to empower 10 exceptional young leaders to carry their message to their peers and create a global movement of young people countering violent extremism from the bottom up. And I think that phrase in itself, bottom up, is wonderful. Since the launch of Extremely Together in 2016, we have published the world's first toolkit made by young people for young people, outlining the tools and best practices we need to prevent violent extremism. We have spoken in major events worldwide on the field and have organized training programs for the youth. And we have taken to social media and the internet to write stories, share our own messages, and inspire others. I've seen the effect of Extremely Together in the local work I do in preventing violent extremism in the Philippines. Back there, I run a non-profit organization called Kris Library, next slide please, that promotes peace through education. We've built peace libraries, provided scholarships to young people from vulnerable communities, and campaigned for peace education to be included in school curriculums. Extremely Together has been an enabler for Kris Library, allowing me to find more opportunities to expand, find new channels to share our stories, and find allies, including the late former Secretary General Kofi Annan, in this massively challenging task of preventing violent extremism. Sometimes it's simply important for a young person just to have somebody like Mr. Kofi Annan believe in her. Before I close, I'd just like to say that for education to be an effective pathway to peace, we need to change how we think about education and the solutions we're currently taking to prevent violent extremism. Next slide. When we say education, it can no longer be just the passive transmission of lessons from a teacher to a student. Schools and quality education are incredibly important, but they form a small part of a dynamic learning ecosystem that will equip young people with the values they need to promote peace. Investing in education for peace also means creating social media campaigns, engaging influencers and vloggers, enlisting the participation of media networks to give balance and conscientious reporting, working with religious educators, and making families a part of every child's positive learning journey. I wish I could say I learned everything I had from school, but the truth is Facebook, YouTube, Wikipedia was quite more important that time to me back in college. And I'm sure that using these tools will also help us a lot. Next slide. Second, extremists are extremely good at getting into the heads of the young people they target, tweaking their techniques according to our specific vulnerabilities and habits. This is why on our end, we fight back by doing the same or better. We have to know our young people really, really well and understand that there is no one-size-fits-all program in education for preventing violent extremism. Third, next slide please. In our drive to make peace an indispensable part of education, first, we have to make young people understand why it's important. The present education system drills us every day, telling us math is important, science is important, English, French is important, but does it teach us the importance of peace? The answer should be yes. Young people will never be truly invested in learning the values needed to sustain peaceful communities if they don't know how important it is to their everyday life. Peace is not something you can eat. Peace is not something that gives you a job. That's what they think, but we have to correct that. Peace is not just the vague concept of people of all skin colors holding hands around the world. Peace is also a means to an end, a sharing of common goals. With increased understanding across diverse groups, we are improving our chances to address global problems. Next slide, please. Such as climate change, corruption, transnational terrorism, and more. Next slide. The purpose of education should also not just teach us things. The purpose of education is also to let us think carefully about what we are being taught. Young people must learn how to learn critically and independently in order to resist the pull of fake news, dangerous propaganda, and charismatic demagogues. We must learn not just to learn, but also to unlearn, to be able to unlearn bad habits and bad principles that are preventing us from becoming better people. Next slide, please. I started this speech sharing the story of my uncle from the Philippines. I often think that if I were in his place, I could have suffered the same fate. In each step of his life, he had been exposed to different vulnerabilities, and violent extremism was what he chose to hold on to. To truly address this kaleidoscope of grievances and reasons that led him to the life that he's had, we also need a kaleidoscope of solutions in education to address them. This is why I actually disagree with the phrase education as a pathway to peace, which I originally stated as the theme of my talk. We need to think of education not as one pathway, but as a whole transportation network working for peace, with different transportation system, customized solutions, hardware and software, and the right values inculcated in every person. My uncle, who dreamed of fighting for justice in the courts, fought instead for his belief in violent extremism. But with a diverse set of opportunities that educate, support, and empower the youth, my only hope is that someday vulnerable young people like him will be here today speaking in front of you instead of me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arizza. Now moving on to the last speaker,